Hey everyone, Jennifer Lee Chin here from NBC Sports Bay Area. And I just recorded a podcast segment for 49ers Talk with Charles Davis, who is one of the NFL Network's draft experts. And he had some interesting insights on who the 49ers might take in the draft. And what's fascinating about this 49ers draft is that at number 11, they really could take any position. And the draft pundits across the board have said from cornerback to tackle to defensive end, defensive tackle. But Charles Davis and I are kind of on the same page that we do think that the defense is where the 49ers focus for that top pick. And he does think that there are a lot of guys that could end up being with the 49ers and end up being productive. So really, really good deep draft class for the defensive ends and defensive tackles. So like Matt Maiocco said, Walter Nolan is a candidate who could be a guy that the 49ers take. Defensive tackle, has a lot of pass rush ability, but they also could take an edge rusher. And there's a couple of guys that he mentioned that I think we've talked about before. Um, I'm not sure that the 49ers will take a guy that has any sort of character issues at all. And the kid from Marshall does have a little bit of a background, Mike Green. So I just don't know that they do that. This is a locker room that's really close, and I just think that with that considered, that this is a locker room that has taken chances before on guys that had character issues, like and I don't think they want to do it again. Reuben Foster was a guy who they fell in love with when they met face to face. And I've got to say, when I met Reuben Foster, I thought he was a charismatic guy and he played lights out on the field. So I just think that, when you look at who the 49ers might draft, they look for team captains. They look for guys who have been All-Americans, that have good grades, that are locker room leaders, character guys who also play really well. I think sometimes there are guys that they may take with a little bit less talent, but better character issues, or character leadership characteristics. Like you look at the guys that they've taken in the past that have done really, really well, like Fred Warner. It is George Kittle. It's Drake Greenlaw. I mean, even Talanoa Hufanga. These guys were later round picks, but they turned out to be really, really good players for the 49ers. They found these diamonds in the rough, but they had really good character issues. And there's something to be said for guys that are later on in the draft that want it and they work harder for it. And so that work ethic bleeds through in their NFL career. So there are some guys that the 49ers could take later rounds, and he told me those. So you definitely have to tune into the 49ers Talk podcast when we post it. I think we're going to record Sunday, so it'll either post Sunday or Monday. But Walter Nolan is a guy that Charles Davis does think would fit in with the 49ers really nicely. There's also a couple guys that he said could fit in on day two or day three for that Dre Greenlaw spot. So, with Dre Greenlaw having gone on to Denver with a big contract, that weak side linebacker position is a position that the 49ers are definitely going to look for. I think they want to bottle up the defensive front, especially at tackle. And I think, most of the guys that have been talking and gals that have been talking about the draft have been talking about how you could get two defensive tackles in two separate rounds and they could still be day one starters, at least rotationally, because it's just different with defensive line. They rotate in and out. There are guys in this draft that you could get in the third and fourth round that are going to be rotational players that are going to contribute from week one. So, it's not always guys that have huge production either in college. Sometimes it's guys that are diamonds in the rough. Charles Davis pointed out to me that Danielle Hunter was a guy who had 4.5 sacks, and he's one of the best defensive edge rushers in the league. So sometimes it's, the college stats don't say it all, and it's the character of the guy, who it is, and what the coaching staff can and the scouting department sees in that player. I mean, you just got to look at the 49ers and the stars they've had. Yes, Nick Bosa was a top round pick. He is a star. But you look at so many of the players on the 49ers roster, like it's Diamanda Lenore. It's, Fred Warner was a third round pick, George Kittle, the guys that they've gotten undrafted free agents or later rounds. Juwan Jennings. Yes, there are stars. Christian McCaffrey was a first round pick. Brandon Ayuk was a first round pick. Trent Williams was first round pick, and Nick Bosa. But there's so many players on this 49ers roster who weren't high picks. They weren't first round picks, and they've turned out to be pretty good players, I think. And I think you probably think so too. Um, there are several players who are, tackles and guards that the 49ers could take in later rounds, but this just isn't a class of like last year. Last year, the offensive line class was one of the deepest that we've seen in the draft. This year, it's a little bit lighter. Same with the quarterbacks. Interesting that that's kind of gone hand in hand, right? If you have good offensive linemen, you have good quarterbacks. If you have less offensive linemen that are going into the draft, not as many quarterbacks. Um, so I do think that that kind of goes hand in hand. I don't think the 49ers take an offensive lineman as much as everybody wants in those first rounds. I think it's defensive line and I think it's defensive tackle first. I didn't ask him at all about running backs. The 49ers haven't brought one in at all for a visit. They could get one. Just because a guy doesn't come in for a visit doesn't mean anything. The 49ers have drafted a ton of players that they've talked to at the Senior Bowl or at the combine at the train station, which is like speed dating for football prospects. So just because a guy doesn't have a 30 visit with the 49ers does not mean that they aren't on the draft board and doesn't mean that they won't get drafted. Sometimes there are guys that have not had any contact whatsoever with the 49ers. They get drafted. So it's going to be a fun, interesting week next week. John Lynch is scheduled to talk to us on Tuesday. And so definitely have a lot of information then, but definitely I'll post it up, that Charles Davis video, and we'll have it up with 49ers Talk on the podcast. So stay tuned. We'll have all the draft news, everything coming from John Lynch, and I might have another interview or two coming up. All right. Hope you guys are all well. Happy Friday. Happy weekend, everybody. We made it.